Okay, can you give me an example of like wokeness run amok?
On the macro level, it's like the rigid enforcement of like progressive values. And if there's any deviation, you get bucked by the system or you get like, excised or whatever.
What do you mean by bucked by the system?
So if you're in school, people will try to like cancel you or get you kicked out. If you're like a faculty or administrator, people will ask for your resignation.
Okay, so like threats to livelihood.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Lots of cultural pressure, lots of social pressure, sometimes direct like pressure from staff. So like I think Brett Weinstein at like Evergreen College was like a pretty good example of that. I think Brett's arguments were, even if you disagreed with them, I think they were entirely reasonable.
He was interested in exploring like race realism.
Okay. He's an evolutionary biologist. It's an appropriate topic to explore, right? One of my biggest frustrations as like an online debater, content creator, is people like me end up getting tasked with debating these like esoteric or very difficult to navigate scientific fields, and nobody from those scientific disciplines will ever enter into any of these discussions to give their opinions. So if somebody that actually has a background in the field wants to like enter into that field and give a discussion on race realism, well, I don't know now, but back then, Brett Weinstein talking about race realism and evolutionary psychology, I'd prefer that to like, Nick Fuentes or somebody talking about it.
It's a pretty low bar to clear. I'd hope that it was maybe a little bit higher, but okay. That's
well, I mean, Jordan, I'd prefer him to like Ben Shapiro talking about it, I guess, yeah.
Another low standard. All right. So
well, it's conservatives. The standard's not very high, okay? I'm trying my best here. No offense to Brett, or take offense. I don't want Brett to do like a workshop on like, let's talk about like the systemic injustice that appears in society and how we can like alleviate some of the pressures that minorities feel in like America. Like he's an evolutionary biologist. What is he going to say to that? Like that's just like a virtue signal. Like, oh, let's like, I brought a slideshow from YouTube.
I know, but like, I think that there's something in between this huge virtue signal and then ramping it all the way up to like, I'd be interested in discussing race realism with you and the idea that there may or may not be superior racial genes, even though that's junk science. To me, well, it's no different than if he had brought up like skull shapes.
Phrenology.
If he said, I would be happy, I'm not happy to participate in this like anti-racism exercise, whether or not it's good is subjective, obviously. And you can have his disagreements with that. But then to follow that up with, but I would be happy to discuss phrenology.
Well, but the phrenology is by definition.
With the black students of this.
Yeah, okay. Sure. Phrenology is a bunk science, but like, look at where we're at now, okay? I'm glad you picked this topic because it illustrates my point perfectly, right?
Okay, perfect.
We've made a justification for an evolutionary biologist to not talk about evolutionary biology because it's like insensitive.
No. He's free to talk about it, but I'm also free to scrutinize the implication by which, like, why is he demanding it? This is now the time to bring it up.
Well, because people want to have a conversation about like race and stuff, right? So wouldn't this be, if he was ever going to do it, like that would be...
I think it's a little bit unfair to characterize it as like, oh, people just want to have a discussion about race. Like,
that's true. They didn't want to have a discussion about race. They wanted to force white people off the campus using social pressure for reasons.
I'm not even going to defend that or discuss it or whatever, but I think like the situation is a little bit more nuanced than, oh, he wasn't allowed to, he got fired or like whatever.
I don't think he actually got fired. I think he ended up settling with the school and leaving with some payoff package, but it was obviously everybody wanted to leave, the students, exactly. And I think the faculty as well.
People think that it starts and ends with like, oh, they, and he talked about this. Like I listened to his interview on Joe Rogan where he said that, he is a Jewish man and he is uncomfortable being told that within a country that he wants to live in, there are spaces that he is not welcome in because it's happened historically to Jewish people, which is a completely defensible point. What is indefensible to me and what he conveniently leaves out is not only did he voice his disagreement, which is completely fine. We can argue and disagree about like which strategies about anti-racism and social justice are best and appropriate. The umbrage I thought people were taking up with him was that he was saying, oh, but I would be happy to give a lecture on race realism, which is essentially the new version of...
Well, hold on, what did you think he was going to say? Was he going to say like, welcome, today we're going to study the warrior gene and why black people are predisposed? Like, did you really think that was going to be like his presentation? Like, we don't even know what the presentation would have been.
I know, it would have been very interesting to hear all about...
But we never got to hear it.
Race realism. Well,
there are things you can talk about for, like, I'm sure as an evolutionary biologist, you'd have something to say.
But do you
maybe his whole presentation...
think that he was sad that he didn't get to give that presentation? Do you think that he was really making that offer to give that lecture? Because
it sounded like the offer would have been
people.
That, like, if you want to have a day where we discuss issues that are relevant to minorities, here is an issue that I can discuss that's relevant to my particular scientific discipline, which I think is what would make the most sense.
The study of how they're inferior to white genes.
How do you know that's what he was going to say? Maybe he's going to say black people were superior.
Yeah, maybe he was. Maybe we were deprived of an excellent lecture where he made that exact point.
Regardless, it's a college campus. Isn't this like where those types of conversations should be happening with an actual evolutionary biologist rather than like whatever your local conservative group is or your local YouTuber?
I agree with that entirely, but
well, then what's the problem? Then what do you disagree with?
My disagreement is that doesn't meet the threshold to say that it's gone out of control. What you just went on to describe, in excessive detail because he will not ever stop like telling the story.
Well, I described it because you asked me for one example. That's one example. We can go through plenty others if you want. I know. That was the only thing, but
I think you and your audience know all too well that anecdotes, like data is not just the plural. Like,
Sure.
Yes, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, data's not the plural of anecdote. I understand. But when you start to get like story after story after story after story,
is that story
some
after
of which
story though?
It is story after story.
Okay, like I'm not even going to disagree that like you can throw these anecdotes at me all day, but they will always just be that. They will just be anecdotes. Like, are we actually seeing a meaningful trend? And I mean beyond the scope of individual people having their livelihoods disrupted, losing their income or whatever. Honestly, for the most part, I would disagree, or like I would agree with you that like in each like discrete example that you're going to bring up, there were inappropriate measures that were taken to HR to get them removed from some campus where somebody should have been able to speak where they weren't able to. But I'm saying, can you see this borne out in any sort of meaningful policy that's been instituted at even at a municipal level or possibly state or federal? And I just don't think it's ever met that threshold. And I think that alone kind of negates your entire premise that it's gone too far, because we would see it happening in Congress, happening in state legislatures, happening, Congress is federal, or at the Supreme Court, that because wokeness has gone amok, we must make these corrective policy measures that could potentially, do more harm than good. And I guess that's mostly what I'm worried about, like the policy implications of saying that, like, okay, even if wokeness has gone too far, fine. Like, for the sake of the argument, I'll concede, like, it has gone too far. Like, what do we do about it?
Oh, I said I give you the last word. Well, I understand that it's not there, like, in policy positions, but in schools and in the response to what's happening in schools, it does seem to be there. Now, for whatever reason, progressives are really bad at getting people elected and getting their will enacted in Congress. Mm-hmm. But I think across, like, college campuses, like, when you look at, like, man, what was the last place? Like, the ideological leanings of, like, professors and stuff, it's, like, 85% left. And, like, even some of the econ departments, I don't know if it's true here for University of Texas.
But is that a problem? Should we be hiring professors based off of their partisan affiliation? Shouldn't it be based off their expertise in the subject, how well they are at lecturing?
Yeah, it should be. But you just told me that somebody with the expertise in evolutionary biology couldn't talk about it because it was racially insensitive.
No, I did say that he was fine to talk about it, but I was saying it's interesting also to explore the implication of why he decided that was the appropriate moment to give that particular lecture.
I understand, but I'm saying that, like, when I'm not saying we should hire people based on their ideological proclivities.
It sounded like it.
No, it didn't. You just heard that because you wanted to hear that.
Oh, okay.
But if you're getting this huge slant in a certain direction, the question is, like, well, are all
how do you know that partisan slant?
The question is, are all of these people, do they just happen to be left-leaning, or is there like a culture that's kind of developing that encourages only left-leaning people to participate, or people that aren't left-leaning to kind of like hush their opinion a bit?
You say, is there a culture? No. I think you firmly decided that,
there obviously
definitely is a culture.
There obviously is a culture.
There is this liberal orthodoxy that's being enforced within academia or whatever.
Progressive orthodoxy.
Oh, okay. Aren't you a progressive yourself?
Yes, but I don't enforce a progressive orthodoxy. That's why I'm here at the University of Texas talking to kids.
But are you sure that that's really the progressive orthodoxy?
What for? What?
If you went up to the majority of progressives and you gave all of these examples, do you think they would wholesale start endorsing like any of the repercussions that happen in all of these like awful anecdotes that you're giving?
Yes.
Where somebody's like you're positive on that? Okay, just like wholesale disagree on that.
Over 51%.
You would be able to find plenty of liberal and left-leaning people who would be able to condemn any sort of actions that were taken. Like,
there probably would be some, but I think that over half of like progressives would be in favor of like viciously getting rid of like certain types of thoughts that they feel like don't belong on college campuses at all.
Like what types of thoughts?
Like.
And how would you even like eliminate these thoughts? How would these progressives?
Well, you do it through
on
social
campus,
culture pressure, right?
And are they not allowed to do that?
I don't think they should on college campuses. No, enforce because I think that a college campus should represent.
This is what I mean. There's like wokeness just ends up turning into.
Wait, I'm answering specifically. You're not letting me respond to your questions.
Wokeness is anything I don't like.
No, that's not true. Okay, what I'm saying is that like I think that on college campuses there should be like a diversity of thought, right? I should be able to find on a college campus like the local fascist squad like talking about fascism, and if I don't like what they have to say, I should be able to ask like my political science teacher, like, hey,
that's
these people
what those progressives are doing.
No, they're not. What they're saying is we need to protest, boycott them, and get them kicked off campus so that in our own poli-sci classes we can circle jerk about how ideologically pure and cool we are without ever having to address an uncomfortable thought or deal with trains of thought that are hard to...
At what point do your criticisms of the your local white pride group, fascist group start, in your opinion, going too far? Like you can only criticize them up to a certain point before you're like, hey, you're heading into territory where you're like your wokeness greed.
Yeah, I think the issue is
like
when you're
at
not
odds with other people's rights.
Yeah, when you refuse to platform it at all, I think that's an issue because then people don't even know how to engage with those different strains of thought.
I know, but you know who was proposing stuff like this? It was liberals, not progressives. Like back in 2019 during the presidential campaigns, Kamala Harris was the one who was going up on the debate stage and saying that she was making it a policy promise that she believed that Trump should be banned off Twitter. This was back in 2019.
Kamala Harris is a progressive, not a liberal though.
What?
She was like Medicare for all. She was way to the left of Biden. She absolutely was.
She was. But is she now?
No, she fell in line because Biden is a boss.
You know who's disagreeing with her?
What?
The other progressive on the stage, Elizabeth Warren.
Good. And now look where she is.
And where's that?
Not where Biden is. Or Kamala Harris. Okay, final word, go.
Final word. I told you I'm not here to make any sort of
Well, just give us a final thought. I gotta hope people want it.
You give your final thoughts first, okay?
My final thought is it's hard to quantify, like, because people ask,
maybe
like,
because it doesn't exist.
No. It's hard to quantify, like, because people say, like, show me like a poll or show me a thing of like why.
Yes, people ask for evidence. They ask me for these inconvenient things like citations for the assertions that I'm making, where, you have to actually prove the, the empirical claims that you're making.
You're doing it right now. You're not giving me a chance to speak.
I'm not. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Go for it.
I think that you can see a huge trend both in the ideas and stuff that get passed around and enforced socially and college campuses among faculty and staff, where you're getting more and more people that are complaining about, hey, I didn't fit the progressive orthodox here, so I quit. There was an anthropology department where people are complaining about this. I wish I could remember the school. I should remember. There was that University of Washington thing. There was stuff that happened, the Oberlin stuff, where they were like racist against the bakery for arresting a black person. You have the Brett Weinstein stuff. There's like story after story after story, and I acknowledge they are just stories. But like at some point, when not only are these stories becoming more frequent, when it gets support en masse by progressives, because you do see them generally across social media where we can quantify it, supporting these stories en masse. Like I don't know what piece of evidence you would need to see like, oh, okay, maybe this is like a problem that we should start to worry about.
No, I do think that those individual instances are problems that have to be dealt with, but we already have the tools to deal with them. You can appeal. You can appeal to your department chair if you're within academia. You can go to HR. You can file wrongful termination lawsuits. Like we have the courts. Like there are avenues for dealing with these things. All of them are available to these people. Like, I would honestly say that like Weinstein's life has only been made better by that, because he's now like a millionaire. Like he just grifts off this entire thing. He'll never stop. It was excellent for him. Like on principle, like I would disagree with him, but it was only to his benefit. Like you think he's like, has he truly been silenced? Like I heard more about this man after that happened than before he was a nobody.
Yeah, for certain people, they can benefit from it, but for the overwhelming amount of people, it's a negative thing. There are certain huge people that can benefit from like being canceled because they've got like the platform, they get like all the media attention.
No, but he was that person because he was a nobody before that, right? Or was he?
Yeah, but he managed to spin it off into like a media career. But most people that get canceled like don't benefit from it. You agree with that, right?
Yeah, but like how many? That's like the problem.
Like 99% of people that get hardcore canceled don't benefit from it. There are a few that manage to spin it off into something successful. But
when you say like most people who get canceled, though, like are you making the assumption that like most people are like working class people and this is happening within like
people
workplaces?
On social media that are getting like canceled, people in college teachers that are tenure that are getting canceled? Do
you think social media is indicative of like the views of your average American? Don't you think
I think it's becoming
skewed?
More and more in line with the views of the average American, yes.
Okay, like all empirical research like runs contrary to the assertion that you just made. Like even if
okay, hold on. No, that is not true. One second. The empirical research says that Twitter tends to be more white, more affluent, and more young than the American demographic. But research will not tell you that opinions on Twitter don't represent the opinions of any Americans at all. There is a divergence, of course, but the opinions of online
I never said
people.
That they don't represent
the opinions of online people 15 years ago on the internet were crazy, not resembling real life people. Nobody went to the internet in 2002 to find out like what do Americans think about XYZ. But nowadays with social media, whose explicit goal is to connect as many people as possible across like political paradigms, of course you're going to see like Twitter today in 2022 is going to represent more American opinion than a GeoCities website in 1998.
Why is that?
Because more and more people are connected to the internet today.
I think only 35% of Americans are on Twitter. Of that 35, I think it's something that like 25% of users, or like a vast minority of users actually account for the vast, like 97% of tweets.
Probably,
so
yeah.
we're truly definitely talking about, yeah, we know that, like a vocal minority here.
Sure, it is still a vocal minority, but it's becoming more and more of a majority. Like 15 years ago, my mom would have never said that she gets like news on Facebook. Today, she gets her news exclusively on Facebook. And I think it's something like 65 or 70% of Americans say they get the majority of their news from social media.
Aren't
so they might not be
telling on yourself a little bit by saying like my mom, or like citing like a personal example, kind of like,
Okay, well, I like to do the 1, 2. So the first was my mom. Okay. Mm-hmm. The second would be, I'm pretty sure that like the most recent poll that I've heard is like it's between 65 and 70% of Americans' primary news source is social media. Like it's such a huge deal. You've got Facebook talking about like Cambridge Analytica and stuff in front of Congress. You've got Congress constantly asking questions of like, how do we deal with misinformation online? You've got some people that would assert that maybe you're like on one breath, you're telling me like, well, social media, does it really represent much? And then on the other hand, you've got people saying, on the other hand, you've got people saying that like Russian interference in different social media platforms was so important. It might have been the tipping point for the election in 2016. So, I mean, it seems like it probably matters.
Oh, I'm not saying that it doesn't matter, but I'm saying like to what degree is it indicative and like reflective of, your average American voter? Because like you're saying, your average American, like most people who vote, right, are they wealthy, or like what
your voting population probably skews older, wealthier, whiter, would be my guess.
Okay, like rich people, almost by definition, we're talking about like a minority of people, right? So like the vast majority of this country is like working class, right?
Okay.
And you're already saying like, you already can see that like Twitter skews affluent, skews white, skews rich, skews educated.
Yep.
Okay, like that's
like
not
the voting population.
That's not I know, but that's who's voting. I'm talking about all Americans, not just voting Americans.
Okay, well, all Americans, like Americans that are 9 years old, or what? Like 9-year-old Americans or what?
What? I don't know. It's your topic, but like I would say like for the sake of this, like Americans over the age of like 16, maybe 18.
I think social media is giving us more indicative views of like what they think as time goes on, I would say.
You're just wrong. Okay.
I'm not wrong.
So
okay, here, final thing, and then because
my final thing is that you say you're like a pretty big like free market guy, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we can find some common ground here. I don't think you have any sort of meaningful policy prescription that you could put forward to deal with, you know, the supposed overabundance of wokeness that's occurring on college campuses and, you know, in your house, just your workplace, like anywhere. But like, okay, like this is the common ground is like maybe to introduce like antitrust, because what you're complaining about is like capitalism to me. You're complaining about just actors within a free market who are navigating that to their benefit and for profit. So, for example, Joe Biden, I think within the last year, made the statement and then walked it back that Facebook, like quote, practically, Facebook is killing people because of COVID misinformation, because of vaccine disinformation that was being disseminated among social media. And he backed off that pretty quickly, even though the first take was the base take. Facebook absolutely is killing people because they were promoting misinformation. They were promoting conspiracy theorists, people like Alex Jones, you know, and what the question is like, okay, if that's happened, what are we going to do about it? Because he's not going to regulate them like that.
Yeah, I agree. And my goal isn't generally to function like from the government. I think like socially we should pressure people to not be as big on like the cancel stuff. That's kind of what I push on.
But what's the point of having this like, or like, I guess this principle if you're not going to actually try to institute it into policy? And
because it doesn't have to be, we can have social pressure that isn't like dating norms aren't
so you're just talking about just culture war.
Yep.
You're not interested.
I'm a YouTuber. That's what I talk about.
Yeah, we know. But then what's the point? All you're doing is complaining that people don't agree with you.
Yeah, getting people to change their mind. That's why I do events like this.
Yes. Was your mind changed?
Nope, but I hope yours was.
Okay.